collaborative and student-focused governance. Okay. Motion and second to move into closed session, please.
So moved.
Second.
We'll do the workshop first, and then
Okay.
we'll go into closed session.
Okay. Be that way. All right. Mr. Keeler, floor is yours.
Thank you, and thank you for letting me lead the pledge. I don't think I've done that since 6th grade, and I had a little moment of panic. But I think I passed.
Yes, you did.
So we were asked to give a little, essentially a refresher on board governance matters, and with an initial focus on Robert's Rules of Order, because that's something that very arcane, and it's very good to have a reminder of that from time to time. So we've prepared a workshop, but we're pretty flexible in what we address today, and we want to be responsive to questions and the interest of the board. So if questions arise during the course of this, please feel free to raise the questions and have a discussion here together, because the agenda is a very broad description of what can be discussed today, and we have some ideas, but you know, we're here to hear from the board and the superintendent as well. So thank you for that. So just starting out, actually, maybe if we can just have a little discussion among ourselves about what governance really means in the context of a school district, and what benefits arise from having a unified team between the superintendent and cabinet, essentially, with the board united in purpose. So any thoughts on that? What does governance mean to you, and what are the benefits of having a unified efforts between board and administration?
Anyone? Dr. Lewis.
Governments mean is a body that will oversee the mission, goals, and vision of the school district. Having a unified board will mean confidence, trust, and it will give confidence and trust in the superintendent and his ability to select, promote, and accountability for the district.
That's great. Other thoughts?
Yeah, governance is not being involved in the day-to-day operations, but setting goals, like Dr. Lewis said, setting goals, helping evaluate those goals, and oversee really the overall just actions of the district and the progress. But as far as the day-to-day operations, that goes to the staff.
Okay, so focusing on the oversight role of the board rather than the day-to-day management, but goal setting, big picture objectives rather than the day-to-day granular activities of the district.
Evaluating.
Other thoughts? I'd probably ask Elliot, and I didn't introduce Elliot, and I think most of you have met him before because we were here once. A few years ago, though, but Elliot Duchamp was a superintendent in Riverside County for many years, and he worked with super cohesive boards, and he was there long enough to see the ups and downs because he worked with some boards that weren't super cohesive, and he may have some thoughts on this.
Yeah, pleased to meet you all, and to see you all again. It's great to
Into the
be here.
microphone, please.
Oh, yeah.
It's a good time to remind
And
everyone.
Mr. Keeler reminded me of that, so, I retired 5 years ago, and since then I've been working with boards, superintendents, and cabinets, and it's been a real joy to still be involved in public education. The thing I always tell board members is you're sitting there in the place of the community. You're the eyes and ears of the community. You're the oversight of the community. You represent the community, not just the children, but the community. But I think as you've all said, You don't do the day-to-day operations. That's not representation. So I love the term trustee because you are a trustee of the community.
Okay. Any other comments?
I was just gonna say, where possible, from where we sit, to remove barriers if we can.
Okay, so a goal or a priority to remove barriers, create opportunity, create educational equity in opportunity for everything this district has to offer, which is an amazing range of programs, and that's great. Excellent. Okay.
And we do have fiscal responsibility to ensure that the district remains solvent, that public education is the outcome, and our staff and our teacher are equitable, but the fiscal overall responsibility of our taxpayers and our bond that has bought into public education in our community.
And there are few things in California government more confusing than school district finance. It is incredibly complex, and the staff who can master a budget and really understand it, I have the utmost respect for them because it is really complicated seeing how everything works together. Well, that's great. And we'll address more some of these big picture governance issues a little later on in the presentation. I wanted to launch into the discussion of parliamentary procedure. And starting out, we are generally guided by Robert's Rules of Order, and that's the most common system of parliamentary procedure that school districts follow or not strictly adhere to, but are guided by, and that's important. So the question is, who was Robert, and why do we follow his rules? Well, Henry Martin Robert, he was a 19th century engineer. He was involved in some big organizations, and he wanted to create some uniformity for how large deliberative bodies operated. And he thought if we had a set system of rules, we could avoid disruption and chaos at these meetings with people all yelling at the same time. And so let's create a body of rules that essentially set some sort of congressional procedures that people can follow to have certainty, organization, and to ensure a few really important things. There's a saying that a meeting without structure is like sailing without a compass. You spend a lot of time getting nowhere. Okay, you need to know where you're going. But what rights does Robert's Rules try to protect? And I think I was going to have Elliot talk about these.
Well, and I think you were also going to make the point that your Robert's Rules are not a law. If you break Robert's Rules, nobody's going to come up with handcuffs and say, oh, motion out of order. But they are a set of sane decorum, and they give rights to all members of the board to have a say in a formal process. And that's why the motions sound formal. That's why there's things like calling for the question, so that both the majority and the minority have an equal say before the vote. Now, once the vote's taken, the vote's taken. But as a board, you want to make sure that everybody, every single one of you, has an equal say, equal opportunity to argue your position. And when I say argue, not yell, but argue in a polite way. Robert's Rules sets an order for that. And it helps you to develop your own rules and regulations because you actually use it in types of that. So.
Yeah, and the next slide as well, I think you were going to cover.
So you have some obligations as a board. I'm glad you said fiscal because I spent many years in the business division. I'm currently working as a fiscal expert in San Francisco Unified. And my theory is you look at the budget and you know where the school district's at. So as a board member, you are obligated to attend all meetings. And, gone are the days when you can walk on the dais and tear open the agenda. I've seen people do that. I hope nobody here does. Now you have to break open your computer. to introduce and second motions. So anything that's on the agenda is just nothing till you make a motion, till you discuss it, until you act on it. To speak on agenda items after first recognizing the chair, having the chair recognize you, and to raise points of order if there are things that are not going properly within the process. And finally, and most importantly, to vote. Your vote is what you bring to the table.
So throughout Robert's rules, there are references to the chair, and of course, in this context, it's the board president or whoever's presiding. If the board president is absent, then the vice president will be running the meeting and is essentially the chair.
And if the president and the vice president are both missing?
Then it's usually the clerk, right? And if the clerk's missing too, you don't have a quorum and there's no meeting. So there you go. Let's talk about the interplay between the Brown Act and Robert's Rules. First of all, Robert's Rules, the Brown Act does not enforce any sort of or mandate any sort of parliamentary procedure. It just isn't addressed. So how you run your meetings, there are very few rules in the Brown Act about that. Robert's Rules is adopted or guides most school districts in the absence of another more specific statute. Brown Act is law. Robert's Rules is procedural guidance. Elliot mentioned there are no Robert's Rules police. If you make a major Robert's Rules error, you're not going to be arrested. You're not going to be fined. Your meeting might be a little clunky, but it's usually not a legal problem. Robert's Rules are not expressly adopted by this board. Your board bylaw 9323 says the board president shall conduct board meetings in accordance with board bylaws and approved meeting procedures. That's all it says. Nowhere do you adopt Robert's Rules, but Robert's Rules is the best system to use, or at least to follow as closely as possible in order to have an organized meeting. And
it's courteous.
It's courteous, you're right. It's diplomatic. It's a polite way to address issues, and especially when there's disagreement. Because when you have an organized system to let everyone have their say, disagreements go so much better when people have an opportunity to fully voice their position and their concerns. And then the majority rules. But, in some settings, if a majority just tried to silence a minority on an issue or squeeze them out or not let them be able to make their points, those meetings could turn chaotic or just wouldn't be effective. And, we shouldn't be afraid of ideas. There should be a free exchange of ideas, but they should be freely exchanged in order, following the directives of the chair or the board president. Okay, so I'm going to talk about, I was going to say, if there's a conflict, the Brown Act always controls. The Brown Act will always control over Robert's Rules. Minor errors in following Robert's Rules are not Brown Act violations and will not invalidate a board action. Okay, so that's an important point. Okay, the first thing I want to point out from Robert's Rules is something called a point of order. And a point of order is something that is raised to correct a breach of the rules or a breach of order. And it's only used to enforce major infractions. It's made at the time of the infraction. A second is not required. It's not debatable. It's immediately ruled upon by the board president. So what's an example? Let's say during public comment, someone goes beyond their 3 minutes and we enforce the 3-minute rule. But for some reason, the board president doesn't notice it. And so someone's going into their 4th minute, okay? Any board member could say, point of order. We've lost picture here. Any board member could say, point of order, we've moved beyond the 3-minute limit. Okay? There'd be no debate, there's no motion, there's no second. This point of order is directed at the board president, and the board president will say, thank you. Yes, your time is done. Please move on.
Point of order.
Point of order,
Point
we've
of order.
lost,
Can we get the screen back on?
we've lost the screen. Okay, good example. Should we get the screen back, President?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Would
I-
that have been a point of order or point of personal privilege?
So a point of personal privilege is more like the air conditioning has failed and it's way too hot in here, or something like that. That's more something specific to the individual rather than to the general operation of the meeting. It's really rare to have a point of personal privilege, but it could arise. And most often, where I've seen it, it's been that the air conditioning shut off, or someone is blocking your view of the screen, or someone's holding a sign up that blocks the screen, and so
And you have to interrupt.
and you have to interrupt because you want to be able to see what's happening,
But
right?
It's not a point
Oh,
of
because
order
it's
in
from
regards
your point of view. Because to me, I'm like, oh, we have it right here. That's an extra benefit, but I don't know who else can see this right now. The general, okay. So it's like a personal preference. So I was, yeah, that's why I
Yeah,
asked.
and we're not, we're recording, but we're not currently live streaming. And so no one, is
Missing out.
missing out right
Okay.
here, exactly. Okay, did I kick something? No, it's not me. But everyone does have a copy of the presentation. Dr. Lewis,
Yeah.
are you raising a hand?
The only reason why I said so, because it is still a public meeting, and if we had somebody here, I don't know if there's anybody in the West Wing or not, but,
Yeah,
okay,
okay,
We'll add the PowerPoint on the website as well.
okay.
okay, perfect example though, so, well done.
Dr.
So-
Lewis.
So back to your illustration, I think that's a good illustration. So like if you're not sure, like maybe the president maybe wasn't aware, and so you'll say, point of order, it's past 3, and then you acknowledge that to the president. Now the president might, or the chair might, want to extend it. So once you acknowledge it, it's the decision of the chair to allow that person to speak longer or not. That was,
Well, so it would not be a discretionary act because your policies say you have a 3-minute limit. So it would be incumbent on the president at that point to enforce the rule. But individuals raising point of order do not enforce the rule.
Right.
It is directed to the board president, who then enforces the rule. Exactly. But I'm not trying to suggest that you can, at your discretion, let some people do 4 minutes and other people do 3, right? We can't do that. We're going to treat everyone equally. So if for some reason we missed it and there was a mistake, we raise the point of order, it gets corrected. I saw this point of order just last week at a board meeting where someone raised a point believing that a board member's comments during the board report exceeded the scope of what's allowable under the Brown Act. And so they raised a point of order saying, this is not just a report of your activities, conferences, schools visited. You're moving into substantive policy discussion and it's not on the agenda. So point of order, this is not appropriate. This should be agendized and it should be, brought forward in the future. Board president should rule on something like that. And, usually the answer would be, that's right. If
If it is.
Yes, exactly. So, correct, we'll put this on the agenda for a future meeting, something like that. Okay, so, motions generally, track an agenda item. So you have an item on the agenda for action. I'm on slide 13, and the board president opens the floor for motions. So, you get to an item, there may be an administration report on that item, and then the board president will say, usually, do I have a motion, right? And then someone makes a motion, you have a second, then you have debate. And that's the way Robert's Rules generally works. Once there's a motion made, The debate should be germane to the motion that's before this body. And the board president's job is to make sure that everyone gets an opportunity to speak. And normally, everyone has an opportunity to speak before someone speaks for a second time. And members should only speak when recognized by the board president. Of course, it's the board president's job to recognize everyone. And so he can't choose not to recognize people because he thinks he won't like what they say, right? We don't do that. But rather make sure everyone gets a chance to debate or discuss an issue before then giving someone a second chance. And this can sometimes be a challenge. I mean, honestly, because sometimes two board members will have kind of different concerns, and it will kind of become a conversation between two board members. And I'm not just talking about this district. I go to many, many districts, and sometimes that can happen,
City
right?
councils do it too.
Every deliberative body does it. Everybody. Yeah, it's not just you, it's not just them. I mean, it is just a common issue. And just understanding that the board president should be recognizing any trustee before that trustee speaks. And one nice thing about that, and I know it's not really an issue here, but it does prevent members from just going at each other back and forth, just, debating directly to each other. Because again, this is a deliberative body. This is not just a conversation between two trustees with different points of view. This is a group of 5 deliberating together in an organized fashion as directed by the board president.
Excuse me. So at that point, since we use point of order to call the attention of the chair, what does the chair use when he's trying to call the attention of the rest of the members?
Well, yeah, I mean, he can bang the gavel, but normally, technically what the board president would say is, and it sounds kind of rude, but you're out of order.
Okay.
But being out of order doesn't mean you're out of control. Out of order just means you've departed from procedure. And normally it's followed by, you're out of order, I haven't recognized you, and in fact, it's now Ms. Dominguez's opportunity to speak. For example, that'd be an example, okay? So he would explain, this is inconsistent with procedure, but I'm sorry, this is out of order. It's actually trustee Montez's opportunity to speak. So that's the type. He is the defender, and when I say he, it's because obviously Mr. Martinez is your board president, but it could be he or she, is the defender of each trustee's rights to speak and to be heard. But he does have some control over the order and the process. Again, making sure everyone gets their opportunity. Yes, Mr. Montez.
Another way of doing it that's not so brash is just for the board chair to just call point of order and then explain what the point of order is.
Yeah, and
Without
that's
saying
fine too.
Without saying you're out of order.
Okay.
You just say point of order, and then whoever calls the point of order can explain what they want to call out or whatever, or say.
Yeah,
Okay.
and he can say, I'll make a point of order here. There's something like that. Yeah, exactly.
Not order in the court. No.
Here we go.
Court.
Please, let's hold it and let the speaker speak. But Dr. Lewis, you had something?
I'm just referring, like, sometimes how do the chair or the president, when the discussion goes off topic from the motion?
So that's usually essentially a point of order as to germaneness. And your next slide 14, talking about motion, says to be in order, the motion must be directly related to the question under consideration. Frivolous, vague, incoherent, and duplicative motions are out of order, but also discussion that is beyond the scope of what's before the board are also out of order. So if someone is saying, well, wait a second, but what about this? And it's like, okay, this is not at issue right now. We have the question, and sometimes the board president will need you to bring you back to the question. what is the question we
item.
are voting on? Yeah, the item.
Yeah.
What is and Robert's Rules refers to it as the question, but what is the item that we're voting on? The item is about this, the motion, and sometimes he'll have to re-explain the motion. The motion was to accept or to approve a resolution to do X. And the debate must be centered on that. So please proceed. And that's, so a reminder, bringing you back that this is what we're talking about to keep you within the scope of what it is that's before you. So that's a great point.
And just
Okay.
so we can follow along, what page are you on?
So I'm now on slide 15. I'm going to talk about subsidiary motions. And a subsidiary motion means that an initial motion is pending, okay? But then subsidiary motions or sub-motions can then be made. The most common subsidiary motion is a motion to amend, okay? And I'm going to talk about a few of these subsidiary motions. But all of you should have gotten what I called Robert's Rules cheat sheet. It should be with your presentation. And so this lists all of the most common motions, talks about how to make them, whether you're allowed to interrupt a speaker in order to make it, whether a second is needed, whether it's debatable. Some of these motions are not debatable. Like I mentioned, a point of order, not debatable. Just you raise the point of order and the chair makes a decision, right? Whether it's amendable and whether there's a vote needed, and if so, is it majority or is it a 2/3 vote that's required? So the cheat sheet's really helpful and really easy to use. So talking about subsidiary motions, if we, yes,
So let's say I'm the chair and Ms. Dominguez raises a point of order on me. And I'm the board chair and I don't like it, so I overrule it. What option does the rest of the board have?
In Robert's Rules, none. Okay, in Robert's Rules, it's incumbent on the chair to make the right decision. If the chair doesn't make the right decision, they can always be removed, right? But
No, but before going to that step,
Right.
what are the, let's say I'm going on and on about something that's outside of the item or outside of the order, and Board Member Dominguez calls a point of order on me, and I decide, hey, well, I'm the chair, I'm not gonna listen to her, I'm just gonna keep going. What option does the rest of the board have to get me back on track or stop me, before going, any other?
Yeah, well, I'd recommend that a majority of the board make a point of order as well, consistent with that. And if you see that a majority of the board has raised the same point of order,
And let's say I overruled that.
Yeah.
And it's all
Robert's
the-
Rules does not have an answer to that. Doesn't have an answer to that. And that would be a board president really abusing the role. And so,
I mean, wouldn't it at the very least, let's say, 3 or 4 board members say, hey, Board President, all due respect, you're out of order, and all of us would like for you to get back on track, or would like for you to stop, and so we can continue the meeting.
I don't know if that ever happened.
No, I'm just saying, what if?
Worst
Just-
case.
Right.
yeah, worst case, there are a few other motions that could be made.
Could Board Member Dominguez or any of the other board members say, and this is hypothetical, could they say, you know what, we need to take a break.
Yeah.
Let's take a 5-10 minute break.
Yeah, motion,
And-
motion for a
The
recess.
board chair doesn't want to recess, but 3 or 4 other board members are willing to do that, at least, so that the chair can come back to their senses or whatever it is.
Right.
Take a breather.
So there can be a motion to recess, and you get a first and a second, then you're going to have to vote on that, and you would have a recess. You could you could call the question, or you could move to limit debate. If, for example, if everyone has said their piece, but the board president is just on a roll talking about other stuff, but you think debate's complete, you make a motion to end debate or a motion to call the question. And if you get the vote on that, then you just immediately move to the vote and discussion is over.
If it's seconded.
If it's seconded, and it has to be approved by 2/3. But if you get 2/3 approval, so 4 vote, yes, we've had enough discussion of this and we're going to shut down our rogue board president, the vote, a 2/3 vote, which would be 4 out of 5, actually, with this math, would end debate and you'd move straight to the vote.
So the reason why I bring it up is because I just want to show that there are steps that the board or a majority of a board can take to not allow like dictatorship type, behavior. Even though the board chair has a lot of discretion
Yeah.
in running the meeting and conducting the meeting, it doesn't mean that a board majority still has options, there's still a, what do they call it? There's still controls and
Checks and balances.
still checks and balances, yeah. That's what it
Yeah,
is.
no, that's absolutely true. Absolutely true. And again,
Because when you started the meeting, you made it sound like the board chair pretty much, there's no law, you're not breaking, yeah, even though we're not breaking laws, there's still a set of rules that we can still, that a board can still have an option to, if it needs to.
yes, if it needs to. And remember, Robert's Rules is set up assuming that the board chair is there in good faith to protect the rights of all members. And if you have a board chair that consistently is not doing that, then you need a change, right? But it presumes that in good faith, the board chair is allowing everyone to speak their piece, keeping the discussion germane to the item, not abusing the power. Again, Robert's Rules is, and of course, this is nothing personal aimed at you. We're in the hypothetical. But if there were a need to overrule, again, Robert's Rules is not the law. And so if there were a motion made to, we need to end this debate or we need to stop the discussion of things beyond the scope of this agenda item, you get a second, you vote, you move on. Even though that's not specifically in Robert's Rules, the Brown Act says majority vote rules on a governing board. And if it's something that needs to be accomplished, for example, to stay consistent with the Brown Act, we're talking about something not on the agenda, but the board president powers through it and wants to keep talking about it, the rest of this board, to protect yourselves, you need to shut it down, right? Because it's not on the agenda. It could be a Brown Act violation. So you're going to vote. We're going to end conversation on this. I move that we, cut off conversation of things not on the agenda. Do I have a second? Do a second. Do your vote. And then you're moving on. So there are things that can be done, especially when you're at risk of a statutory violation like with the Brown Act.
And for those, in like calling for the question, it's not debatable. So there has to be a motion, a second, and an immediate vote. And, because I've seen more arguments over calling for the question. Somebody says, I call for the question. The board president says, okay, let's all vote. That's not how it works. So.
Could you just give an example?
Yeah, so you're in the middle of, well, actually, I saw this at a board meeting. One board member was speaking, somebody didn't like what they were saying, they called for the question, and the board president proceeded to stop the debate. Now, interestingly, they had 3 attorneys on the board plus counsel there, and they debated what they should have done, but it's a pretty simple thing, is that if you call for the question, and it requires a 2/3 vote, if that doesn't pass, then the debate continues. But then you can also do, as Mr. Keeler said, limit debate. You can say, I move that we limit each person to 3 minutes of discussion. Second, I don't believe that's debatable either. I don't think it's.
Yeah, I don't think so either.
But I also
Um,
think it's a two-thirds.
It is, because it cuts off somebody's right to debate. So it's
Right.
one of those important things that requires two-thirds. So for example, let's say we had a contentious issue and every board member spoke to it. And the board president then recognized each board member for a second go-round. And we all notice that you're just kind of saying the same thing again, right? At that point, the board president could call the question and cut off debate, just in his discretion, okay? Or a member could say, I move that we end debate, and then you immediately go to a vote. There's no debating.
No need
A second, you need a second. So a motion to call the question or to end debate, a second, no discussion of it, straight to a vote. If the vote is yes, two-thirds to end debate, then you move straight to the vote on the substance of the matter. So that's a way to just move on. But that usually happens when you get to a point where discussion has taken a long time. We've heard everybody's thoughts. It's started to get repetitive. And so people are just ready. It's time to vote.
Mr. Keeler, for clarity, when you call the question, it's basically saying, okay, we are voting on X, Y, and Z.
No,
So there is a motion pending. So a motion has been made, it's been seconded, and now we're in debate. And debate has gone on for a long time. There's a motion there. So let's just vote on the motion. That's calling the question. Let's vote on this motion.
So
We've
we're
had
bringing-
enough debate.
So we're bringing the question forward, past the debate and saying, okay, let's do what we came for.
Yes, let's vote. Let's vote on the motion that's before us.
Question real quick on the two-thirds. Is that two-thirds of the majority present or two-thirds of the body of the whole five?
So, that's a great question. Procedurally, so for action, the board acts by majority of the total membership of the board. So even if just 3 people are here, 3 board members are here, you need all 3 votes, because that's a majority of a 5-member board, right? So that's for action. For procedural matters, there's not a requirement that you have a 3-member majority. So if you had 3 members present, and you needed 2/3, 2/3 of those who were present could vote on a procedural motion, because it's not action of the board, it's just procedure. So that's an important question. Okay, so this is just a helpful cheat sheet that I think maybe you want to laminate it if your board president have it with you, because even I have to carry it with me when I know some meeting's going to be contentious and I can't keep it all in my head at once. Oh, look, we're back. This is great. Okay. So I'm going to jump. Okay, so I talked. Uh-oh.
Just 1 second, if board president, if I may. Just so you can explain making a motion on top of a motion, and then what's the order that those are acted on? 'Cause sometimes it's confusing.
Yeah, no, that's a good
Will
point.
this be covered later on?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, let's talk about it right now, because this is my slide. I'm going to cover the slide 15 subsidiary motions, and then I'm going to jump forward because we talked about some stuff that followed it.
Okay.
But again, a subsidiary motion is a motion that's made when a substantive motion is already pending. So approve the contract with, Johnson Contractors.
1 year instead of 2.
So, well, okay, but the motion was to approve the contract as it was written and as it's in the agenda, okay? So that's pending, that's the main motion, okay? So there could be a subsidiary motion that's brought that says,
During discussion.
during debate. So debate is happening and another trustee says, I move to amend the main motion to require proof of fingerprint clearance before the agreement is ratified or signed, right? So you're going to add a condition to it. And that's an addition, it's new, okay? So the question then is, should we approve this amendment to the motion? And that's debatable. So I make a motion to amend the main motion to add this qualifier that the fingerprint clearance has to be submitted before the superintendent signs it. Do I have it? Is there a second? There's a second. Okay. So then you can debate whether the main motion should be amended, and then you're going to vote on the amendment. Okay. And what happens if the amendment is approved by a majority? You have not approved the contract with a new condition. You have created a new main motion that includes this added condition. So then you debate this new main motion, and then you have a vote on the new main motion. Okay? It's really common when there's an amendment to vote on the amendment, and people think they're done because they voted on the amendment. But voting on an amendment just changes the main motion. You then debate the new amended main motion, and then you vote on this new amended main motion. So it can be a little confusing, but it's just important to remember that. That's the order of
So we have to
events.
basically vote twice, one
Right.
for the original and one for the amendment.
So once the original is amended, it's gone, and you just have the amended.
That's what I wanted to explain, that once you take action on the amended, the original one is no longer there.
Right. So if you have a successful motion to amend, the amended motion is now the main motion. The first one's gone. It's gone. Okay? And so then you vote on the amended new main motion, and if it succeeds, it succeeds. If it fails, it fails. And yeah, so it can be confusing, and that's why sometimes, honestly, I see board members say, I'm going to vote no on this. They don't like the main motion, and they'll say, I'm going to vote no on this, and I want everyone else to vote no on it, and then I'm going to recommend another main motion that includes a requirement to have the superintendent sign only after a fingerprint clearance is submitted. So let's just vote this down, and then let me make my motion. So sometimes that will happen, and you'll just vote down the main motion, and then you'll come up with this secondary motion, and just skip the amending process. Some boards will do that.
But
Just
that's not the,
it's not the most correct way of doing it under Robert's rules. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so you have a main motion, somebody amends it, it gets voted down, you go back to the main motion?
yes.
Yes, if the amendment fails, the main motion stands, and you resume debate on the main motion. Great point. Great point.
And
Require
it,
the second one, do you require a first and a second?
All of them.
A motion to amend requires a motion and a second.
All motions.
Yeah, all motions. The only thing that doesn't is like a point of order.
and I think it's important for the board chair, when you go back to the main motion, to say we're voting on the main motion as presented, or we're voting on the main motion with the amendment.
And-
And I, almost every time I've seen a motion amended, somebody gets confused. It's just like, oh, we already voted on it. No, you voted on the amendment. So that's where the board president really, now, that would never happen here, I'm sure, but the
It
board.
will, it sure won't.
Yeah, so it's really important.
You vote on the amendment, and then
First
you
one
vote.
dies.
What?
The first one dies, the main motion dies.
If it's amended.
If it's successful, if it doesn't pass, it goes, you go back to the original.
Yeah.
Yeah. So slide, I don't know what slide number this is, but I mentioned that, okay, so 17, the process is often misunderstood. If the amendment is successful, the action item is not complete. A successful vote to amend means that there is a new substantive motion to be discussed and voted on. You're not done. Okay. But if the motion to amend fails, exactly as you've said, the original main motion, it's still there. So that's what you're going to continue to debate and vote on. Okay, could it be amended again? Could someone try to amend it again in a different way? Absolutely, they could. Could someone try to amend it again in the exact same way? No, you already did that. And the board president wouldn't allow it. Okay. So other procedural motions can be used for postponing consideration of the main motion, referring a matter to a committee or back to the superintendent, for example, limiting discussion, creating special rules for the motion. A special rule might be, okay, we've been debating this for 15 minutes. Let's allow just 1 minute each for board members to make a final discussion. And so that sometimes happens. There's a special motion. Okay, we've been over this, but people didn't know maybe they had their last shot. So I move that each trustee have 1 additional minute to address this, and then we cut off debate. You vote on that, 2/3 vote, it passes, and everyone gets 1 more minute, and then you're going straight to the vote. Okay? Divide the motion into smaller subjects. It's really rare in a school district to have an item that's a compound item that should be broken into smaller bits. You tend to have really good agendas that, you know, the item before you really doesn't make sense to break it into smaller bits. The most common example is your consent agenda, right? And you have a procedure for pulling something off of that. And that's kind of what this is, where you know how to pull something from a consent agenda to have it taken up individually. And you usually don't need to do that because usually those are routine items, but that's most common where you see this. Okay. Postponement, once postponed, no further action is taken on a matter until it's reopened. Unless specified, the board president determines when to reinstate the subject, not sooner than the next meeting. So for example, if there's an item before you and the board just has a bunch of questions about it and you don't feel like you had enough information before you, someone could say, I move that we postpone this indefinitely. Okay. Second, there's a vote. It's postponed indefinitely. Now, your board policies, board bylaws say that the board president and the superintendent set the agenda together. So if you postpone something indefinitely, or if you table something, okay, it's going to come back when the superintendent and board president decide it's going to come back. Okay. Now, if you want to postpone something to a date certain, you can say, I move that we postpone this until our next governing board meeting. And if that passes, it for sure comes back at the next meeting. Or if you say, I move that we postpone this until the December meeting, it will for sure come back at the December meeting, unless there's a legal mandate to address it sooner.
Yeah, I just want to add one thing, because in addition to the Brown Act, you also have laws on certain things that have to be done at certain times. And I recently saw a board want to postpone voting on their budget. And they can't do that without severe penalties. So you want to be, and I've rarely seen that happen, but it does happen. Somebody says, oh, I need more information before I vote on this budget. Well, as you know, you have like 2 weeks in June to get your budget approved. I mean, it's been worked on all year, but there generally is not time for big changes at the end. So there's always that hovering kind of deadline to the state or federal government, or some obligation you have to do legally.
And I'll get you in 1 second. You're going to rely on your superintendent to guide you on those things. You know, a motion to postpone approval of an LCAP that would take it beyond the deadline, or a motion to postpone approval of a budget, or something else where there's a legal mandate, or to approve a contract when there would be dire consequences for not approving the contract. The superintendent you're going to rely on him to tell you, you know, here are the dire consequences that would arise. And then hopefully, you know, that would influence the board from, you know, to either not postpone it or to set a special meeting for the next night, or 2 days from then to still hit the deadline, right? Because there are some really important deadlines out there, and you don't want to abuse your motions to postpone. Mr.
If I may.
Yes.
So, let's say the board chairperson and the superintendent don't want to put an item on the agenda, like you said, the budget, or any other item, Our board bylaws are not law. It's district policy, but they're not law. So it's just an example. Let's say a superintendent and the chair don't want to put an item that one of the board members wants to put on the agenda, because our board policy says that. But the board member then has a right to see if other board members agree that an item should be put on the agenda. How do they go about doing that?
That is the best practice, because the Ed Code does talk about individuals placing items on the agenda.
I
And
believe our part says unless 3 board members or more want an item put on the agenda.
right, and so so what should happen then is it should be agendized as an item to determine whether this item should be placed on a future agenda or a specific agenda. So let's say superintendent and board president have a request from a member to put something on the agenda, and they've said no. The member should say, I want to exercise my right to have this on the board agenda for the board to vote whether it should be placed on a future agenda. And that is the way it should happen. So it should appear as an action item on the agenda, and the question should be whether, fill in the blank, shall be placed on the agenda for the, September 15th board meeting for board action. And then that would go on the next agenda. It would be presented. There'd be a motion, there'd be a second, there'd be debate, and then this board
Not to
would
approve the item, but just to.
determine whether it goes on the next agenda. Yeah, and
Dr. Lewis?
Now, is there a workload like for the superintendent to gather information? So I might be a board member and I want this on the agenda, and the agenda is like 2 days to be printed out. Isn't there like 7 days or something where staff or his team can get the information and the items to go into the packet or the background?
that's a great question, a great point. It's your board bylaw 9322. Let me see. So this is the one that talks about board members requesting items to go on the agenda. It says the board president and superintendent shall decide whether such a request is within the subject matter jurisdiction of the board. Within 30 days of receiving the request, the board member shall be informed by the board president if the request has been approved or denied by the board president and superintendent. If the request is approved, the board president and superintendent shall inform the board member of the general time frame that the matter will be placed on the agenda, on which part of the agenda the item will appear, and whether the item requires action by the board. If the request is denied, the board president and superintendent, or if they fail to provide a response to the request, or the board member disagrees with the time frame that the matter will be placed on the agenda, on which part of the agenda the item will appear, or whether the item requires action by the board, then the board member may appeal the response to the request to the board. The board president and superintendent shall place the appeal on the next upcoming regular meeting agenda for board action, but only as to whether, when, and how to agendize the requested matter. A majority of the board agrees with the appeal. The item will be considered in accordance with the decision of the majority of the board. So absolutely, there is discretion of the board president and the superintendent to determine timing, and it's usually, as you indicated, based on the need to gather information, marshal resources, whatever it is. But if the member disagrees, as I think Mr. Montes alluded to, there is a process to dispute whether it's outside the subject jurisdiction of the board, whether the timing is appropriate, whether it's going to be placed in the correct part of the agenda. So you have a process that is intended to work out those disagreements. And so if if a board member says, hey, I want, this item on the agenda, and the superintendent and the board president say, well, we can't get to that till December, usually you can live with it. But if you can't live with it for some reason, then there is an appeal process, and the majority of the board will decide when, how, and where it's going to happen.
Yeah.
So you have a very developed process for that, which has much more detail than the statute. Nothing in the Brown Act even talks about this, but you do have a very detailed process, so there should never be a lingering dispute over this, because if you can't work it out, the board will decide.
At what point would a board member request the majority of a board ask for an item to be placed on the agenda? Would that be during our comment time, or because if it's already not being discussed on the agenda and there's no related item, would they just say it during their
They're
comments?
going to make the request of the board president and superintendent to put it on the next agenda as a standalone item.
And if they don't, still, then you would do it in your public comment.
Yeah, yeah. Or,
Okay, so first privately or in an email.
yeah, and it's their responsibility to do it. Your board bylaws require them to do it. So if there's a dispute, and again, we need to recognize that administration has a lot going on. Some of our requests might require a lot of homework, that there is a need for flexibility generally in making these requests, and we shouldn't jump right to an appeal, right? I mean, we should be able to work together and figure out how to get things in front of the board that need to be there. But I've had situations where people just absolutely refuse. That's never going to go on the agenda. And I'm not talking about here, but I've seen it happen. And so the board had to decide. And you have that process. And there's, in the end, sometimes we will disagree. And sometimes the board will make a decision that not everyone loves, right? But as long as we follow procedure, and even when we disagree, we can be kind, and we can be,
Of course.
we can respect each other, and not assign nefarious motives to other people. It's just we disagreed, and the majority spoke, and so now it's going on the agenda, or it's not, because no one wanted to hear it. But you do have a very detailed process that should take some of the stress out of those situations.
And for the record, that's usually never the case, but I just wanted to bring it up for informational purposes.
Okay, adjourning, it's a motion, a second, and you take your vote. Reconsideration can be kind of a hot topic, okay? Because it arises when the board's already taken action, right? You had a vote on something, you made a decision. So it's a motion to revisit a topic already voted on. It can only be made by someone on the prevailing side. So someone who voted in favor of something changes their mind. It must be made during the same meeting as the original vote unless local rules or practices allow otherwise. So I looked in your bylaws, I didn't see a different rule. So generally, it should be limited to the same meeting. So let's say you voted on something, and later in the same meeting, you thought, wait a second, I think I voted the opposite of what I meant to vote, right? You can make a motion for reconsideration. It was on the agenda during that meeting, so that motion for reconsideration can be brought anytime during that meeting. So you want to wait until you're between items, right? But you make a motion to reconsider, it has to be seconded. And then if a motion to reconsider passes, then the main motion comes back to the board. Okay, so a motion to reconsider,
You bring it back to life.
you bring it back to life. The original motion comes back to life. It's a motion to reconsider, a successful motion to reconsider does not undo what was already done. it means it's back in front of the board. Okay, so I move to reconsider, you get a second, you explain, I think I voted accidentally the wrong way. All in favor, 3 vote in favor of the motion to reconsideration. So board president says, okay, the main motion is before us again, and he restates the main motion, and you go into debate on that, and then you have a vote on that main motion again, a second time. Does that make sense? Hopefully, I mean, these hopefully are rare, and it's usually due to mistake. This is the cousin of a motion to rescind. Now, a motion to rescind is would cancel or revoke previous action or vote. It requires a second, it's debatable, and it's subject to a majority vote. It doesn't have to happen during the same meeting, okay? But it does have to happen before something inalterable happens in favor of the prior action. So let's say you voted during the last meeting to approve a contract. You make at a subsequent meeting, you make a motion to rescind that prior action. If the district's already signed the contract and given it to the other party, motion rescind is not in order because you have a binding contract at that point. You cannot rescind it. Okay. So if you've taken steps in fulfillment of the prior vote, motion rescind, too late. You can't use it. But if nothing has happened, then you can use it.
Going back to reconsideration, you said it has to be made by someone on the prevailing side. That means the person who voted on it. The reason their vote pushed in the action being moved forward, approved. Is that what you mean by that?
or failed.
Or failed, but you have to be on the majority side that approved it or the majority side that failed.
Exactly. So a motion
Can
could
be
have,
either or.
yes, either or. So but you have to always have been in the majority. So whatever the majority was, if it was a no vote and you figured out, oops, my vote should have been a yes, and you ask for reconsideration, if you were part of the majority in that vote, you can ask for
And
reconsideration.
if you're changing your vote doesn't impact the outcome, it still can be reconsidered.
That's right. That's right, because it goes to vote. Now, so let's say it was a 5-0 vote, and someone figures out, ooh, I didn't mean to vote that way, and they ask for a motion to reconsider. Everyone else feels super comfortable in their vote. They vote against the motion to reconsider. They say, no, I voted the way I want to, so I'm not going to move that we reconsider this. And in which case, if the motion to reconsider fails, the original vote stands.
I have seen this happen where the person did not realize that they were voting on someone that they knew, so they asked for it to be reconsidered so that they could abstain. And
Sometimes the purpose is to change the vote for the record, so not necessarily to be successful in passing the item. So, like she said, for example, if somebody wants to, for the record, change their vote, they might bring it back for reconsideration or to rescind, just to change their vote for the record, not to actually, besides trying to get if they don't, sometimes it's just for that purpose.
So both are really important points. If for example, you're just swept along with the momentum of the agenda and you approve the consent agenda that includes a personnel schedule that has somebody that you know, and you had made a mental note, I should not be voting on this, but it just happened so fast, you forgot to abstain or recuse yourself, it would be appropriate to say, whoa, wait a second, I just realized I made a mistake. I moved to reconsider because I didn't intend to vote on this because of a potential conflict. The rest of this board should support this board member, and the superintendent should speak up to say, yes, please approve this motion to reconsider, let's revote. That's something that you should have each other's backs to help each other fix an inadvertent error like that could have significant consequences. Absolutely, you should have each other's
Do we
backs in that.
absolutely have to go to that extreme? Or if I just want to change my vote, say, please, on item, we haven't moved yet to the next item. I think I voted wrong, I'd like to change my vote.
So what Robert's rule says is that any board member can change their vote until the board president calls the final tally and says, the motion passes or something like that. Now, again, you're guided by Robert's rules. You're not bound by it strictly. So if this board wants to allow people to say, wait a second, for the record, I need to specify I should not have voted on that matter, and I now want to make a restatement, that could be done. If there were a legal consequence, like if it were actually a conflict of interest, I'd want to reconsider, I'd want a fresh vote. I would want that as a board member, just to protect myself. But simpler votes, you might be less formal. Yeah.
Question, did you say that we needed to vote on adjourning or just need the second?
So Robert's rule says you vote on adjourning. I see mixed results. I mean, like, for example, you vote to go into closed session. I see other districts that don't vote to go into closed session. They just go into closed session because it's on the agenda, right? Those are not Brown Act issues. It's more local preference and practice. So Robert's rules would have you vote to adjourn. But if your practice is just to say, we're at the end of the agenda, thank you everyone for your participation, we're adjourned, that's fine. It's just not a big deal.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
And just one more question. Motion to rescind, did you say that one has to be in the same meeting or it doesn't matter?
It does not. But if it's not in the same meeting, there's a pretty good chance that the district's going to do something that makes rescission impossible. Because if they take an action in furtherance of the action, like signing a contract, then you can't rescind. So the sooner the better for all of those things, right? The sooner you catch an error, the better. Decorum, board members speak one at a time. Do not interrupt unless the board member who has the floor yields to someone else. Only board members debate. Staff can answer questions if asked or recognized, but staff don't debate. Members of the public don't debate. When you're discussing, this is your discussion held in public, but it's not a town hall, and you are charged with keeping order.
What if in closed session?
What's that?
What about closed session?
In closed session? What do you mean by that?
Well, let's say the board is deliberating on an item in closed session, and that's just an example, hypothetically. You as legal counsel feel strongly about the action the board should take. Would it be okay for the board to say, sorry, Mr. Keeler, with all due respect, this is the debate of the board. Please stop interjecting and strongly trying to persuade the board what you would like the board to take the way of action. Just a hypothetical, or any other one, or anybody else. Let's say the superintendent, whoever's there.
So the board is always in charge of its meetings, whether it's open session or closed session. Now, closed session is often less formal, as we know. It's more common for members to kind of exchange ideas and discuss. But this board, and particularly the board president, can control that meeting. And if in closed session, you're going to take turns and the board is going to be recognized, and you don't want to hear from staff, or you will only hear from staff or council if they're recognized by the chair, just make that clear. And those are the rules. So the board and particularly the board president running the meeting, you get to decide. It's your meeting. And sometimes, there's kind of a free flow of information sometime, and you have to take control back. Or you want to take control back. Sometimes, free flow is fine. But again, it's the board's meeting. The board decides, led by the board president, and all of that is appropriate. Absolutely. Except for me. If I have a great idea, you should just let me know.
Exception, the Keeler's exception.
Yes, no, I retract that. I recognize that I can be limited and directed by the board. I need to be. Okay. Board member filibuster, we talked about this. Somebody wants to dominate debate, wants to keep talking. How do you deal with that? You can call for the question move to cutoff debate. We've discussed that before, so I won't talk much about that. But because it's ending a right to debate, that's an important right, that's why it's a 2/3 vote. So things that would cut off the ability to discuss an issue, they generally require the 2/3 because that's an important part of your job. But sometimes it's just necessary. You're gonna end the debate. It's time to move on. 2/3 vote.
I wanted to make a comment. I noticed that you all really stick to a protocol of going through the board president. When you have a presentation, do you do the same thing if you have a question of staff members? So that, Mr. President, I have a question, I'd like, okay. Because I've seen this often go into a long discussion with a staff member, and sometimes the staff member isn't even answering the question, they're beyond it, so it becomes dialogue. So that's a place where I think formality is very important. I mean, obviously, it's important to get the answer that you need in order to vote. That's always where you're going. But that doesn't necessarily come in a dialogue between a board member and a staff member without the control of the rest of the board.
Okay, excellent. Thank you for that. A quorum requires 50% of your board members. Of course, you're a 5-member board, so in order to have a quorum, you need 3 members. What happens if you have the lack of a quorum? Hopefully it doesn't happen often, but if so, you can choose to wait.
Good point. Mid-meeting, I believe it was public comments. It actually happened. That's when, bio break is happening, and 3 board members left. So that kills a quorum right there.
That's right. It's no longer a meeting. So either you pause, take a recess, and let's say they've just walked out to use the restroom. 2 members sitting here, you can't make a motion to recess or a motion to adjourn, right? You cannot act because you don't have a quorum. But what the board president should say is, we no longer have a quorum, we'll take a brief recess until a 3rd member returns.
The board member and the vice president were both out.
So whatever assertive, well-informed board member remains should say that. And if not, the superintendent can chime in, right?
I don't think it'll happen again. It was just one of those things that it wasn't,
Yeah, not planned,
yeah,
just,
not planned.
it just
was
happened.
Necessary.
Yeah, necessary, and it's automatic because you no longer have a quorum here, so you no longer have a meeting. Sometimes it happens with, you want to start on time, but your 3rd member isn't here on time. It just happens, stuck in traffic, coming back from LA from work or whatever it is, right? So you have your choice to just wait, or you can call the meeting if it looks like it's not going to happen in a timely manner. But you can't move forward with only 2 members.
Yes. Vice President.
Sorry, did we skip some pages?
Well, we skipped some pages about cutting off debate and limiting debate because we'd already covered those. We'd had quite a bit of discussion about it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I'm on.
Covered, call the question.
I'm on slide 27.
Okay.
So.
And
So-
limited debate, we covered that too. Yeah.
Yes, right. So if you are in a meeting and you only have 3 members present, and you have a vote, and you have 2 yes votes and 1 abstention, okay, you do not have action to approve. Now, under Robert's rules, you would. Under Robert's rules, the majority of a quorum wins the day. And so 2 yeses and an abstention would be a yes vote.
For
But
procedure.
So under Robert's rules for all purposes, okay? But in the education code, it says this board takes action, and I'm talking about not procedure, action on an agenda item only by a majority of the board. So you always need 3 votes. So you have 3 members present, 2 say aye, 1 says abstain. You have no action. It doesn't pass, it doesn't fail, you just don't have board action on it. So you can bring it back some other time, but the abstention does not get counted towards the vote. It does get counted towards a quorum. You still have 3 people here, but you just can't take action on it. Now, I distinguished between action items on the agenda and procedural Robert's Rules type questions, because those are not legal actions of the board, those are just procedure. So it's fine to have procedure won by a quorum, majority of the quorum.
So if 2 board members are absent, that's an abstention. If they're absent at the meeting.
Well, that's an absence.
Okay.
Yeah, so if 3 members are present and 2 members vote and 1 says, I'm
No,
not voting, I'm
one says no.
abstaining.
1 says no, 2 board members say yes. The item is not approved, so it fails.
So the item fails, but it's not a no vote, okay? Meaning it can be brought back.
Oh, because it didn't get 3 no's.
Didn't get 3 no's. So you didn't have action on it, so it didn't pass, it didn't fail, it's essentially no action under the ed code.
Because in that case, well, let's say 5 members are there and 2 vote to abstain and 1 votes no and 2 vote yes.
Same outcome, because you don't have 3 no's and you don't have 3 yeses, so you have no action.
And so then the item can be brought back.
That's right. That's
What
right.
about in a personnel matter? Closed session?
Same rule. You have to have 3 yeses or 3 no's to have action.
Okay, so
Right.
In that case, it's a majority of the board.
Yeah, always a majority of the board. That's what the ed code says.
More than likely, something that would happen here, if we had 3 members present and 1 had to abstain. I know there are ways where they can vote where it's necessary. Recommendation.
So my recommendation, Mr. Martinez is referring to, there's an exception to many conflict of interest rules called the rule of necessity. And the rule of necessity will trump a conflict of interest when it's something that a board has to do. There was an example, there's a kind of a famous case where a school district needed to contract with I think it was a local mechanic in order to service district vehicles. They were a small district in a remote area. And there was a board member who had a personal financial interest in that company. It was a 3-member board, and there was a vacancy. And so 2 members had to vote, and they had to fix their school bus. And so the Attorney General said, yeah, it would be fine to vote on that in that circumstance because it's the rule of necessity. Now, I would not exercise the rule of necessity if there were not an immutable timeline that would prevent us from bringing it back when we could have 5 members present. So because the consequences of a violation of conflict of interest laws can be so dire, and the rule of necessity can be kind of, there's not a bright line test, that if I could bring it back or have the superintendent bring it back to the next meeting for action when for sure I wouldn't have to vote and there'd be a majority that could vote on it, that's what I would want to do. Yeah,
Thank you.
and it's a very complicated analysis that if you're ever considering a rule of necessity vote, I'd recommend talk to legal counsel, and if you have time, run it through the FPPC, because they can give advice on that as well. And just so you know, your attorney's advice does not shield you from liability and a conflict of interest. So even if your lawyer says, I think you're fine, relying on advice of counsel is not an excuse if your lawyer got it wrong. The FPPC written advice is a safe harbor. You will not be prosecuted for a violation if the FPPC gives you written advice saying you can do something. Even if later someone, tries to prosecute you. You are immune because of the protection from the FPPC. Your local council can't give you that same guarantee of safety. Problem is the FPPC takes a lot of time, and it's a public record when they publish their advice, and sometimes it's sensitive information that people don't want published. So that's why I approach it very carefully, and if you can just avoid the situation, I avoid the situation. I think you had a comment, Ms. Dominguez?
Yes, if we were to have to use the rule of necessity, would that be documented in the agenda, saying that this is a ruling based on rule of necessity?
Yes, so the best practice would be the item comes forward, the board member with the potential conflict would say, I have a potential conflict because, and then you'd explain the potential conflict and say, however, I've obtained legal advice from the FPPC or from legal counsel saying that due to the rule of necessity, it's necessary that I vote on this matter tonight. And so for that reason only, I'm participating. And so best practice would be to make that declaration and have it reflected in the minutes. That is best practice, absolutely. Great question. Okay, so abstention always counts for purposes of maintaining your quorum, but it's never counted toward a majority vote. The only reason we write that is because there was this ancient Attorney General decision that generically said abstentions count towards a yes in any vote, but it wasn't Ed Code specific, and it's just not applicable in the education context. So that's why we bothered to say that. Voting. Under Robert's rules, you do a roll call vote by the secretary. We know under the Ed Code we have to track how each member votes, and the minutes must reflect their vote, specific in open session and in closed session. Secretary reads out results immediately, or the board president can announce it. It just depends on what your practice is. No other business to conduct until the roll call finishes. Votes may be changed before the final report. I mentioned this before. So if somebody wants to change their vote, you can do that before the board president calls the final tally. He says the motion passes. Before you say that, if someone says, oops, I want to change my vote, they get to change their vote. Dr. Lewis.
So when you abstain for a conflict of interest, do you have to state the conflict, or you can just say abstain?
So if you have a legal conflict of interest, then what the law says is that you are to describe the conflict of interest on the record and indicate that you're abstaining, recusing yourself for that reason, rather than a simple abstention. Now,
So
I've
you
seen
say recuse or abstain?
Recuse yourself. So, and the difference between recusal and abstention is someone could participate in debate and then abstain from the vote, okay? But when you're recusing yourself, you don't participate in the debate. You're not going to try to influence it one way or another. So you recuse yourself entirely from formal debate here, from informal decision-making outside of the board meeting, and it goes on the record, and then you remove yourself. That is the best practice. Now, people have made mistakes, and the FPPC has not sought administrative enforcement when they abstained and didn't technically comply perfectly with the rule. That being said, that's not compliant with the law. So the law requires recusal, non-participation, and normally removal from the room. So you're gonna announce the conflict. You're gonna say, I'm not taking any part in this matter, and then you leave and say, call me back when you're done. and you walk out of the room. And that's the definitely best practice, and hopefully they call you back in before they move on to the next item.
So it's a consent calendar, and I work for Arrowhead, and it's on a consent, you know, how the general thing. So my conflict is I'm employed by that institution, so therefore I would not vote on the whole consent calendar, or, that's what I'm trying to say.
So you could, there are two ways to go. One would be to pull that item and say, I have a conflict of interest with this item, so I'd like it pulled so that I can vote on the remaining consent agenda. And then when the other item comes up, you explain why you have the consent and you leave.
And no, okay.
Yeah, that's the best way. I believe there's some authority, but I'd want to confirm. I believe there's some authority saying if you are recusing yourself from the consent agenda, you still announce the conflict, but you don't have to leave the room because there's no debate. You know, the consent, you don't debate the consent. So I think you don't leave the room for a consent agenda item if you're not going to vote on the consent agenda at all. But if you wanted to vote on the rest of it, pull that one item, leave during discussion of that item, and then you can vote on the rest of the consent item. Good questions. And that's always complicated stuff. I always recommend that you get legal advice. You know, it doesn't have to be from us, but from somebody who's qualified to give you legal advice on it, because you just don't want to have, you know,
Mr.
trouble.
Montes?
Yeah, and I think the purpose of the recusal is so that a board member cannot debate, engage in debate, influence the vote, and then wipe their hands and say, I abstain.
Perfect. Exactly right. Because you are not to influence the vote in any way in your, you know, either formally through debate or informally in the background. So absolutely right. And you don't want an appearance of that. You don't want actual influence. Well said. Okay. Okay. Should we take a short break? Is now a good time for
It's a
that?
pleasure of the board.
We've been going in and out.
Yeah, I mean, I'm fine either way. I can keep going.
I see burritos over there.
It's not live, you can eat it.
I mean, I don't, a break would be nice. 10 minutes?
It's because it is 10:30. So maybe, how many minutes? 10 minutes?
What time do we plan on leaving?
1 o'clock, I believe.
I only have like 4 hours left. Well, laughter. No.
Let's
So-
fix this. You're only paid for 3 more.
Yeah. I'm out of here in 3. So anyway, we're almost done with, well, we're pretty much done with Robert's Rules. And that was a central focus. The rest is big picture, and we'll move through it fast. So I would think a 10-minute break now, and then come back and we move to the touchy-feely stuff. I mean, not literal touchy-feely stuff, but
Okay. Let's just call it 10:45 on that clock.
perfect. Thank you.
Make a motion to take a
break?
recess
Recess,
for,
okay.
till 10:45.
I
Do I have a
second the
second?
motion.
Okay. Board all at once?
Aye.
Aye.
Modeling very good board process. Thank you. Oh, okay. Okay, we are on air, and I'm told we're back, and I'm going to throw it over to Mr. Dushan.
And I'm going to catch, and the first thing I'm going to say is, if you do every meeting like this, you will always have effective meetings. You're using really good protocol. And something I would add is that it's easy when things are going really well, the community's informed, and they love you all, to kind of slip a little bit. And then all of a sudden, somebody catches you. So that formality is just really, really good practice. So I saw this morning, I won't repeat all of this, the board president recognizes who speaks. I think it is important for everybody to understand what the motion is, because that's when you get people who want to rescind or change their vote. And that, who, as you prepare your board, this is for the superintendent and board president, avoid double negatives, like, we don't want this to not happen.
Yeah, we've had cases where sometimes we get confused because the motion is to deny
Yeah,
something, so we vote no, but in reality, it's, we should vote yes if we want to deny an item.
right,
We want to,
exactly.
And in those situations, the board president can say, as a reminder, a yes vote means that we are declining whatever action item, however it's phrased. So that's when it's really helpful to have
And he
the board
has,
president.
and he does.
That's perfect. That's great.
And oftentimes where the confusion happens is when it's a motion on an item that's there legally, like by the State Department of Education, or something you have to pass, and it's not written just in straightforward English. And you've already talked about restricting discussion to the question when the motion is before the board. It's very easy. You, as board members, have a lot on your mind, and one topic leads to another naturally. But sometimes the motion is very restricted. So that, again, Mr. Martinez, you get to be the one that says, oh, no, we're not talking about football fields today. We were talking about...
Just need a bigger
Yeah,
hammer.
all right, big hammer. Okay. So we'll move on to running an effective board meeting again, ruling on issues of parliamentary procedure. And again, you don't have to have a parliamentarian sitting here. You need to get the job done and maintain the decorum. Putting motions to a vote, state clearly. I can't overstate this enough, because I think a lot of times motions are written in a way, like you said, to deny something or something different. And if there is an addendum to the motion that's been passed, to explain that happened and what's going on. And always be aware of the dynamics of the board, the audience, and the staff. Board meetings are somewhat like improv theater. You have your agenda. You can control the agenda. You can control yourselves, but you can't totally control all the people that come before you, and that's why the protocols are very important. So following the dynamics, this is something I'm sure your superintendent does, but it also falls on the board president and all board members to always be reading the room.
I would just add to that, they changed the law recently about how to address disruptions and how to remove people from governing board meetings when they are disruptive. I've been doing ed law for more than 30 years. I have never been to a board meeting where someone had to be removed. I have always seen and helped superintendents and board presidents take actions to avoid getting to that crisis point. And I think somebody mentioned before taking recesses and, limiting debate and things like that. There are so many things that can be done when you're reading the room and you're understanding the dynamics. And if you need to take a break, you take a break and you let people cool down. But that's one of the things I'm proudest of in my career. Never kicked anyone out of a board meeting. I've never had to.
But it has happened.
It has happened. It's happened in lots of districts, but I've never had to do it, and I've always seen really good interventions short of removing somebody. And so I'm not saying it will never have to happen. I mean, there are appropriate cases for it happening. But I'm proud I've never had to kick someone out, and I've never been sued for kicking someone out, because that's what often happens after the fact. So just understanding dynamics, taking breaks when you need to take breaks, controlling the flow of the meeting so that, tempers don't flare. I mean, we can't control everybody, so, it might have to happen. But anyway, so on to a discussion of the role of the superintendent and the governing board. And since Elliot was a superintendent, maybe he'll cover this as well.
Yeah, but maybe it'll be too much.
Keep it short.
I will keep it short. This pretty much covers it, that your superintendent is your chief executive officer. He's the guy in this case, who runs the company. You're the board of the company. He is also your educational leader. And I think that's really important. And as somebody taught me years ago, the way you treat the superintendent treats people, and people watch your behavior. And so you want him to be recognized in the community, in your schools, with your students as your educational leader, in addition to running the whole rest of the district. One of the key things, and this is something that's always, I'm not going to say always difficult, but there's 5 of you, and you all want different types of information. So I think it's really important to agree upon what information gets shared with the board and when. I mean, people used to say, well, there was a fire at a school and you didn't tell us. I said, well, you knew it because the helicopter was over your house and I didn't see it. But we will tell you as soon as you can. The main thing is the superintendent should be giving you the information that you need in order to make a reasonable vote on everything that you do at the board meeting. In addition to that, while he's doing all that, he's managing the buses, the food that comes out of the cafeteria, that the classrooms are clean, and it goes on. And he has a cabinet to help, and it sounds like your cabinet's very much involved with the governance team here. So, and he also is the liaison between the board and staff. And this is something I want to mention, that a lot of times it's very easy for staff to want to pull you into an issue that they have. And as soon as they pull you into the issue, you're in the issue, and you could become part of the issue. So it's very important that the superintendent becomes your liaison, somebody. I think you probably have board protocols. Somebody comes to you with a complaint. Say, oh, I'll take care of that for you. Your job's to tell the superintendent, let it go through the process.
And I'll actually jump in here because we're not going to go through all of this stuff, but I just wanted to point out that you have, as a board, have defined the role of superintendent. You have board policies and board bylaws, and I listed some of them that you can go to and just review. How have you defined the superintendent's role? There's ed code, there's board policy, there's board bylaw, and there's also the superintendent's contract. And the superintendent's contract includes some provisions about the relationship between the board and the superintendent. So that's for homework if you want to do a deep dive, but Elliot gave you a good 20,000-foot view. So role of the board. The board sets the vision for this district. You hire and you support the superintendent. This is your one direct report, right? This is your one employee who you hire, you evaluate, and he should understand very clearly what your expectations are. And he should strive to meet those expectations. But unexpressed expectations are so easily disappointed, right? So make sure you are communicating and that he knows what you want and he has the ability to give you what you want. Your job is to be leaders in the community and advocates for public education. Okay, so that's why you're out and about. That's why you're, going to Rotary or going to the HOA meeting or going, you are out there. And that's, one of the reasons you need the information about what's happening in the district, because you are out and about. And you don't want to be surprised by somebody who knows something before you do, right? I mean, that's the no surprises rule. And it goes two directions. Right? The no surprises rule. You don't want to be surprised by something happening in the district and some member of the community asks you about something and you don't know. That's embarrassing, right? But likewise, superintendent doesn't want to be surprised that you know something that you haven't passed through to him to follow up with appropriate processes. So it's really a two-way street. Ensuring accountability, you have some very clear oversight obligations. You approve the LCAP, you approve the budget. You are the ultimate word on selecting curriculum. You have some really big statutory roles that are accountability and oversight roles in this district. Now, you rely on information coming from the superintendent and cabinet, certainly, in that. But you are the ultimate deciders of some really big issues. And you are the final decider of a lot of important decisions, whether it's hiring, whether it's discipline, whether it's appeals of grade challenges or appeals of employee complaints. You are the ultimate quasi-judicial body for some really important decisions that are made in this district. Sometimes you will hear from the superintendent or you hear from HR or student services that you can't get involved in something. A complaint comes to you, you pass it on to the superintendent, and the superintendent says, you can't be involved while this goes through the process. Why? Because you are the appellate body. You make the final decision. So don't be offended when administration tells you you can't be involved anymore in certain matters. The reason being that if you stayed involved, you'd be conflicted out and you could not act as a board member on the final appeal. You are a very important appellate body for a lot of matters. Okay, so Board Bylaw 9000 talks about the role of the board. I'm not going to go into detail on it, but again, it covers a lot of the stuff we have talked about here. There are multiple slides because I put pretty much the whole thing in this because it's a good one and it's one that's worthy of reviewing. But now I'm jumping to slide 39, talking about what is not the board's job. Day-to-day district management, obviously, and you all understand this very well. You don't direct the work of employees. You don't give specific direction to employees to do certain things or not do certain things. You don't investigate complaints or concerns. You hear them, and you are responsive in the sense that you report to administration that they need to initiate whatever the appropriate process, whether it's a complaint investigation, whether it's a grade challenge, whatever it's going to be. You refer it to the superintendent. I'm often asked, superintendent tells me that I have to back off now because I'm the ultimate hearing body, but I want to go back and tell the community member that I've referred it on and that, I'd like to hear from them if they're happy about it. That's fine. That's fine. We're not, no one's going to tell you, you can never talk to that person again, right? You're just not involved in the substance of what's happening until it comes to you as an appeal. But it's fine to report back. And if they have concerns, well, I still haven't heard, the result and the 30 days have passed and I thought I was supposed to know within 30 days. Well, you can refer that to the superintendent. The superintendent will tell you, well, for a UCP, uniform complaint, it's a 60-day timeline, you know? I mean, so there could be discussions like that. You're just not going to get involved in the substance because ultimately it may come to you on an appellate basis. But we're never going to try to gag you and not let you, you know, be responsive to members of the community. Labor negotiations, you set parameters, you know. Labor negotiations are closely tied into your budget. And I think we'd all pay as much money as possible to the unions, right? If, you know, you want good people, you want to retain good people, you want to, you know, you want to fully fund whatever you can fully fund, but we operate in some really difficult times under some serious financial constraints, and so there are always compromises, and there's always, you know, difficult questions. Well, you give guidance to your negotiating team, you provide parameters for settlement, but you're not at the table, right? And you're not exchanging proposals with the union, and you're not doing it directly, you're not doing it indirectly.
We're making promises.
What's that?
We're making promises.
You're not making promises. You can't. I mean, a single board member can't. And
Nice.
and outside of the formal processes, it's potentially illegal because there are, you know, there are very strict rules
Contractual
about the
agreements
negotiation
already.
process. Yeah, unfair practice charges, bargaining away from the table, direct dealing with unit members rather than through the team. So you've got Dr. Ellis and a team that handles this. She reports back to you. She takes guidance from you, but she does the heavy lifting and personnel management. I mean, you get recommendations. The law and your board bylaws and board policies say the superintendent brings a candidate to you, and you say yay or nay. But that's, you know, there is a process for determining the most qualified candidates, and you get a candidate presented to you for approval or rejection. Hopefully, you know, you get good candidates and they're approved. But there are processes for that. And it's all fueled by recommendations coming from HR to the superintendent and to you. Okay, so different jobs, same objectives. I mean, the superintendent has a different job than you, but you should have the same goal. You should have the goal of everything should be student focused, right? I mean, ultimately, it's about student success. It's about good educational outcomes. So what is the difference between policy and administration? The difference is between, I've heard it described as between steering and rowing, okay? You're on the tiller. You're steering, but you're not rowing. You have a team that's there rowing, okay? And they're doing the day-to-day hard work. Not that your job's not hard. Policy jobs are hard too. But they're doing the day-to-day, and you are providing direction. Anyone have examples of any questions about distinction between setting policy and direction versus execution, administration of the district? I haven't seen that really to be confusing in this district, but I'm not here day to day, so I don't know.
Does anyone have a question or a comment on that?
We're not to go into an employee personnel file.
So that's a great question. The question is when or if a board member has access to an employee personnel file. There's actually an attorney general opinion on this exact topic. And so the question was asked, when is it appropriate for a trustee to access a personnel record? And the AG said, generally it's not, that individual board members don't have a right to access personnel information. Now, personnel information is confidential. California law gives special protections to personnel information. And so it's accessible on a need-to-know basis, but board members individually have no authority to demand it. So if there were a need to know, it would happen because the board made a request. And so, there are very few examples where I've seen appropriate requests to see personnel files. But, for example, had a situation where a board was hearing a recommendation for a promotion for an employee, and a board member said, wasn't there a complaint against that employee like 8 years ago? Whatever happened with that? Okay, and so they postponed a determination on the promotion. HR brought back information about how the complaint was resolved, and it turned out the employee was exonerated. But there was an explanation, and there was good reason to talk about something from the personnel file. But just well, if we're going to promote somebody, I want to see their whole personnel file. We don't do that because the personnel file is going to show leaves and all kinds of private information that just wouldn't be relevant. So if you have a legitimate question that might require some personnel information, the board as a whole makes that request, and then it's only the very specific information that would be provided to you, not just plenary review of the personnel file. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and is that the same for a student?
So student information is protected by state and federal law. We all know FERPA, the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. And that says that school district personnel can access student information for legitimate educational purposes. Okay, so not because we're interested or not because we heard somebody's a bad kid and they might be bullying our own child. I'm just making this stuff up, right? But yeah, or a friend of a friend, tells us something, and so we want to investigate it. That's not a legitimate educational purpose. So you will get, for example, in the unfortunate circumstances where somebody is facing expulsion, you'll get an expulsion packet, or you'll get a recommended determination from your hearing panel. And so you'll see information in that. That's necessary for your determination, right? But you won't get all of their student records because that's not necessary for the determination. And the law says you base your determination on the AHP recommendation anyway. So it will be rare that you will have access to a student information, but when you do, it will be limited to the scope of the decision that's before you. And that's consistent with the law, and it's consistent with your assistant superintendent or the clerk at the school or the instructional aide that's helping with the IEP. No one has access to or is allowed to access student records beyond the legitimate scope of what they are doing to serve that student.
And if they do?
There are disciplinary consequences for that. And in fact, you're assuming that you have the standard CSBA model board policies related to student records, it says that employees are subject to discipline for improper access to student records.
Is there a statutory limits, or what is it called?
Statute of limitations?
Yes, statute of limitations for that?
So in California, so there's not a private right of action for violations of FERPA. Some people have tried to sue, you violated FERPA, so you owe me $1 million. And the courts have said there's not a private right of action. Now, it's enforceable through complaints to OCR, the federal agency. It's actually not OCR. It's the U.S. Department of Ed, their privacy unit. But generally speaking, the enforcement of a statutory right is, I believe it's 3 years. But again, if materials are improperly accessed, upon discovery is when the district is able to take action. So if the district learned today that an employee improperly disseminated private student information 4 years ago, well, the date of discovery is when the timeline for discipline starts running, not the date that it originally happened. But generally, for certificated employees, you go back 4 years. For certificated, you go back 4 years. For classified, you only go back 2. So
that would be a point of order and also a reminder that the superintendent should sort of instruct us if we ask, right, for something that is under FRPRA or personnel, that shouldn't be requested.
So if there were, let me
Sometimes
restate this and
closed
then I'll.
session or
No,
things like
yeah, I think it's a
That
good
should be a
reminder for board members, but also for employees
Yeah.
who may accidentally engage in sharing
With us.
students' information or inappropriately using it. So it's a good reminder, poly district-wide to every now and then maybe send like an email to all users, hey, just reminding you of the FERPA law. It's illegal for you to engage in this type of action or behavior. You can face discipline for doing so.
Yeah, and that may already occur, but it's something
I don't think it
that
does.
administration can follow up on, because it is really important. If a board member were to ask something beyond the scope of a legitimate educational purpose, it's incumbent on cabinet to say, I think that's beyond the scope of what you're allowed to access, right? I mean, they can very politely say that. But with employees, it's equally important to understand the limits that the law imposes. And again, it's because privacy is really important in the state of California for both employees and for students and their parents, right? There's a lot of confidential information that is supposed to be protected. So, okay. Responsible, effective governance and communication. According to CSBA, I'm going to read a quote from their training, but I added a word, okay? To govern responsibly, school boards must be guided by community interests and informed by recommendations of the superintendent and professional staff, and must act collectively and openly to, and then I added learn, because I'm not an educator, you're not all educators, and sometimes we need to learn things, right? So I added learn, discuss, deliberate, and give direction to the superintendent. And so this is kind of their, kind of the baseline that CSBA puts out there. This is what we need to do. And I added learn, but discuss, deliberate, and give direction. Strength in numbers. The board acts only by majority vote. Talked a lot about that. It takes 3. Once a majority has acted, the entire board is bound by the board's action, right? Board took action. You're part of the board. They've decided, and hopefully we can all move on together. You know, I was on the losing side of the vote. Hopefully I don't hold that against you for the next 4 years, right? I mean, because it's gonna happen. It's gonna happen from time to time. And then, again, I mentioned this before, an individual board member outside of a public meeting has no individual authority, right? We can't command the superintendent to do something. We can't instruct a principal to to suspend a student, or, we do not have authority, or individual board members do not have authority to make decisions, to direct staff, to tell members of the community that we're going to resolve something in a particular way. It's just beyond your individual authority. You are part of a unit of 5. And when 3 people say yes, then it's action. I mentioned this before, the no surprises rule. I just think this is so important that you should never be surprised and the superintendent should never be surprised. And if either side ever purposely surprises somebody to put them on the spot, trust is gone, and it is really hard to regain. So it's either because you weren't truthful, you weren't fully transparent, or you wanted to put them in a bad spot. And that is so undermining. So I always encourage administration and boards to communicate regularly, fully, openly, transparently to avoid any sort of surprises, especially those that could be embarrassing if everyone else in the room knew and you did not, right? Or someone walks up to you in the market and tells you something that you didn't know. And likewise for the superintendent. Governance standards, I'm not going to go through these individually, but you have decided that you have governance standards and you have put them down in writing. And these are supposed to guide you in everything you do. And the major ones are Board Bylaw 9005, 9200, and 9240. So I just suggest that you review those and just remind yourself of the importance of these standards that you have agreed upon. And you might think, well, wait a second, these were approved in 2016, so I didn't decide on these. Well, they cover you, you're bound by them, and if you ever feel like you need to change them, bring it up. But they are all reflections of best practices and things that are, tried and true over many, many years. I think I was going to ask Elliot to talk about civil disagreements, because he's seen civil disagreements and he's seen in civil disagreements in his, what did you say, 17 years as superintendent?
17 years, yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
All in one district? All in one district?
All in one district.
Wow.
Doesn't happen that often, does it? So he did some things right to stay around that long.
That's a lot of survival skills right there.
That's right.
I think
So-
Dr. Alvarez hired the right guy for the job.
So, boards are composed of different people, and people have relationships with people in the community. And at its very heart, you should have disagreements. You should have disagreements about what policies are good for kids. You have to come from different viewpoints of what the priorities of the district are. And that's why, again, going back to Robert's rules, provides kind of a framework for how to handle them. When they get out of control, when you get board members that are grandstanding or trying to attack other board members, it becomes pretty nasty. And it sets up a tone for the community. Some board members will bring groups of people to speak on their behalf to the board, and it's very difficult to manage, if not impossible. And I did work with a board that we had a board member that did not behave well. The board censured the board member, and which is something I really don't like to see because it doesn't have much action to it, and it just creates bad faith. But there are times where you have to set boundaries. So I think it's really important to talk about ideas, not people, not, Mr. Martinez. I agree with that idea, not Mr. Martinez. Another one of those, But you hear that a lot at board meetings, and particularly in divisive boards. And when board members bring particular agendas to the board meeting. So I think your discussion, and again, this is where I mentioned earlier, in the good times you set the standards, because there will be a time when somebody will come up to the podium. You can't control who gets elected to the board. So you want to set the standard ahead of time. Let me see.
A common thing that we discuss at the table when we're bargaining is you attack the problem, not the person, right? And think about why you're all here. You care about students. You care about public education. You care about this community. You might have individual differences about approaches, how to best serve students, but never forget, or at least give people the benefit of the doubt that in their heart, they are here for the kids. And attack the problem, but seeing, and I will occasionally see board members criticize each other personally and accuse them of not being there for the students, right? And things like that. And that's just not healthy, and it's not productive. If we have the assumption that we're here for the students, we're here for the community, and we may have different approaches, let's debate those approaches and come to majority vote on how to approach things, but without getting into the casting blame or claiming that someone's not here for the kids, because that just does not help.
And on the flip side, we've seen here in the past, I don't know how many superintendents ago, the superintendent having people from the community come and attack board members. So we've seen the flip side of it.
Yeah, and that would definitely be a no-no.
None of that is healthy.
No, it's
Yes.
all unhealthy. You know, it's interesting, you have posted on the door out there the 4 agreements, and I think they set a good standard. Don't take things personally. Be it your word. Your word is what you have, and do your best. And I think that it's, you know, all of us, naturally, we have strong feelings about education. That's why you're here. And in the heat of a discussion, it's easy to stray from the facts of the discussion and the heart of it. And it's one thing to say, you know, so-and-so and I disagree on this, but you don't have to call each other names. You don't have to yell.
Of course.
And I think what's important is that as a board, once you've voted, your board action is your board action, irrespective of how you voted. It's not like, oh, those other 4 voted for it, I was against it, I'm still against it, and you're fighting it in the community. So I think that's number 5 on the, oh, I'm on a different page.
Nope.
Yeah, okay, number 5,
Always
if you
behind.
disagree with the position, you have a time and place, and you should be able to say that. But once it's done, and it should be all hands on deck to make sure that that decision is successful. Otherwise, the other thing that happens is you've got 2 different directions being given to your superintendent. Like, okay, 4 of us want you to do this, and 1 of us wants you to do that. That's not going to work. I know he's really good, but I don't know if he can carry out two paths at one time in the district. So, and again, as long as you're operating from, as Mr. Keeler said, for what you believe are the good of the students, and knowing that there's not a one rule of what's good for kids. There's not one reading program. I mean, I've seen boards not vote for something because they didn't like a reading program. So, any questions about that?
There's a candidate running for election who came and addressed the board, and of course at the end, made the announcement that they're running for office, mentioned that this board was dysfunctional. I think people in the community sometimes confuse when the board has controversial decisions to make and when the board is actually dysfunctional, because what you've seen today is usually how our board meetings are conducted and how we get along. We agree to disagree, but maybe sometimes boards, and you know this, sometimes boards go through controversial decisions that have to be made. But I just don't see any dysfunction here.
No, I think you don't need to accept the community's definition of dysfunctional, because sometimes that just means we disagree with what you did, or you didn't do what we wanted. I think functionality on a board is coming to a deliberate decision that you all support once you've gotten there, even if you were against it to begin with, and carrying it through, and then enabling and supporting the superintendent and staff to make it work. Not undermining, not going back to the superintendent, or worse yet, to a staff member and saying, I didn't vote for this, but,
Yeah. You're in a long-term relationship, right? Think about a spouse or a girlfriend. If they were constantly bringing up something that you did 4 years ago or 3 months ago and holding it over your head, that's not...
I don't know if that's a good analogy.
Well,
There's stuff I hold up 12 years ago over my husband.
okay. In my personal experience, it has been a positive thing to resolve differences and move on. and to not relive trauma of the past. And boards that are able to move beyond, even if there were a snippy exchange, if you can apologize and move on. And I've seen boards where a member just wanted to just torch another member to show the world that this other member was clueless or motivated improperly or whatever they wanted to show. And the community generally takes away from that, this is a dysfunctional board. They don't say, well, this is a great board, that one guy's bad, but this is a great board. Their usual takeaway is, this board's messed up. So the more we can do to reach consensus, and if we can't reach a consensus, debate in a way that exchanges information, gives the best opportunity to create consensus, but at the end of the day, we live with the outcome and we move on, and we don't just harp on it for the next 4 years. Trustee Williams?
You can move on.
Okay, all right. Okay, so a couple more things, and we are kind of coming near to the end, but remember that you and all the board members represent the entire district. You're from trustee areas, right? But you don't just represent the schools within your trustee areas. And you don't just represent the voters from your trustee areas. Your responsibility is for the good of this entire district. And then if you have a point that you wish to make to one or more board members, you think they really need to understand you, you still make it to the entire board, right? And that avoids getting things personal. Trust is really important. I talked about that in the context of the no surprises rule. But trust emanates outward from the board. And so the more that you can develop trust with cabinet, let the world see that you have trust in your cabinet, and that you trust that you're coming to the right results. I mean, that people sense that. And if you're ever in a place where you're not sure you're trusting the information that you're getting, you just need more information. You need to do what you need to do to develop that trust. Because I know administration wants you to trust them. They want you to rely on them. So what do you need to have that trust? Because the world senses when there's trust. And if there's indications of distrust from the dais, it shakes the trust of the community in your schools and in your programs. And of course, you want to keep all the kids and all the students in your programs that you can. And trust is an important part of that.
I want to add to that, if you start having sides on the board, not only does that break trust in the board, but the community then takes those sides and then brings them back. It's sort of a recirculating kind of thing. So as long as you're acting in assuming that everybody's bringing their best intentions, even though you may disagree with them, that is a fantastic role model for your community.
Yeah, you never want the community to say, we have a 3-2 board. And like, what do you mean by 3-2 board? Well, we can always count that we're going to have 3 votes one way and 2 votes the other way. It's probably not true. The vast majority of votes are probably 5-0 votes, the vast majority, right? So what's happening that makes people think, well, this is a 3-2 board? It's usually how the debates occur, and sometimes how people vote on the controversial issues. And sometimes you will have 3-2 splits on things like that. But the fact that the vast majority of votes are unanimous votes, yet people still think I have a divided board, it's usually because of how the difficult decisions, how the debates over the difficult decisions are made. That's what gives the community the impression. And so civility, every board member being really well informed, very, very important in those contexts. Public behavior reflects on individuals, the board, and the entire district, right? That's why being a very diplomatic and civil in your discourse is important. Conduct yourself in a way that builds confidence in the district's leadership. So This is kind of for outside-facing communications. You know, you're cornered in the supermarket and somebody wants to debate an issue. Sometimes the first thing you have to do is clarify, because people often don't understand the complex issues that you're dealing with. You know, there's a headline or there's one issue and they've heard something about it and they want to come and they want to, you know, accuse you or question you or just, you know, they're wondering what's going on. You very often really have to explain and clarify what the issue is, but then also clarify that you're one board member and you don't act independently of the rest of the board. And you're interested in what they have to say. You're there for them, to listen to them, and that can inform what you do going forward, but you can't commit to any particular course of action outside of a board meeting. Confidentiality, especially closed session, right? Cone of silence. It is so important. And there are liability issues that flow from breaches of that confidentiality. It can be a lawsuit. It could also be really complicating, for example, labor negotiations. I think I've told this story a million times. I was in bargaining and we were given a couple options. We talked with the board in closed session about, well, we can increase health benefits this much and give a raise of this amount, or if we freeze health benefits, we can give this bigger raise. Okay, and that was the discussion. And we went in the next bargaining session and we made the offer where we increased health benefits and gave the lesser raise because of the increase in benefits. And the union president, or the chief negotiator, slapped his hand down on the table and said, "This is an insult. I know you have authority to go to 4.25%. And they stood up and they stormed out. And it's like, well, first of all, we didn't have authority to go to 4.25% because we gave an increase in health benefits. So that was incorrect. But then why did they know this? How did they know the parameters for settlement? Because if you disclose the, you know, last, best, and final, the parameters for settlement, where are you going to settle? At best, you're there. Maybe worse, right? So that really messed up bargaining because it made the union mad because they had incomplete information, but that leak really made it harder to settle. So it can cost millions of dollars to leak information out of closed session. I mean, that's just whether it's for liability for a breach of confidentiality related to a student or an employee, or as to labor negotiations or anything else you're dealing with. So super important.
And you, by de facto, become then a member of the bargaining team that you shouldn't be. And members of I was working with a board where 3 of the board members talked individually with the union president during bargaining. And it's just, bargaining is a very careful, well-orchestrated process, and you have experts that do that, and it really gets messy if more people get involved in it.
Yeah, and I'm certainly not casting aspersions on your labor associations. They have a really important job to do. My dad was a member of CTA. My mom was a member of CSEA. It's really important work, but they have their objectives and they have their job and they do it really well. And you have an administrative team that fulfills an important role as well. I'm going to get to Dr. Lewis, but before that, confidentiality. Anyone ever talk to somebody who was really good at very subtly pumping you for information that you almost didn't realize that they're working you over trying to get insider information? Some people are really good at it. Some people are less subtle, right? They'll just walk up and say, "Hey, what about this?" And it's easy to remember, well, I can't talk about that. That's, confidential. But some people are really good at it, and you're in a conversation, and the next thing you know, they're bumping up against stuff that you shouldn't disclose. It's really important to be just on your guard. I'm not saying be distrustful of people, but be on your guard because we don't want to let anything slip. Dr. Lewis, you had a comment or a question?
No, so we have this nice little sheet that identify for all the board members, like if you want to pull an item or amend, or, you can write that down. But sometimes I think the trust with the public opinion is like, a person will speak, and then a board member says, oh, I'm gonna pull that item. You know, whether if you would give like the chairperson, like, oh, I have a question about this, I wanna pull this anyway. So it empowered them to like, they wanna set policy, sometimes they'll say point of order from the, from the public, you know, so if they feel that if they could sway instead of us working as a team and say, hey, we're gonna pull this, or, you know, I want this, you know, once they make this statement and then the person says, oh, I'm gonna pull it after, it sort of undermine, or people feel, well, that person can set the agenda. So how do you go about that?
That's a good question, a couple different ways. First of all, just from the mindset, this is your meeting. A governing board meeting is your meeting held in public, and there's a limited right of public participation, right? Again, this is not a town hall meeting. You have very clear procedures for where the public can participate, but it's limited because ultimately this board is making decisions. When I see things pulled because of community input, it's usually either because the board suddenly gets worried that they don't have all the information that they need, or it's a political or just local hot potato issue, and they, you know, and you get worried. And that's usually why I see things get derailed. The only way to be really confident is to be prepared by reviewing all the material that's available to you. And if there's a lack of information or there's more information wanted, you have time between when you get the agenda packet and when you go to that board meeting. And the Brown Act allows you individually to approach the superintendent to get additional information. And so doing your homework and getting additional information as necessary so that you feel confident that you're ready to make these decisions. And that is, it's a two-way street, because the superintendent's going to push out information to you that he thinks is sufficient to make these decisions. But if things heat up or there are new developments, it's fine to reach back out to the superintendent, and it's not a Brown Act violation to have individual conversations with the superintendent, or he may refer you to other staff to get the information that you need. Most of the problems that I see in my line of work in governance is related to communications, and just people either, well, usually just not being proactive in getting the information that they need. And it's just, you know, like any relationship, both sides need to know what's expected, you know, what's needed so that they can fulfill the other's information needs.
I think it's important to, if you quote here on the street, there's going to be 50 people at a board meeting, to give the superintendent a heads up and the board president, because that's really a place where you don't want any surprises. And a lot of times you may be familiar with the issue, and the superintendent can prepare you to either, well, not necessarily respond, but to know how that fits into whatever the agenda item is.
Yeah, and sometimes it's not even on the agenda, right? There was a fight at the school, and parents are going to come and they're going to express concern. It's not on the agenda. It wasn't part of agenda prep. It wasn't in your packet, but the superintendent will, you know, should push information out to you so that you're ready and so that you can, you know, respond as appropriate to the comments. Last thing on this slide is we need to be patient. You know, the public, they do not understand the constraints under which you operate. They don't have a full understanding of all the information that you have, right? And we just really do need to be patient with the community as they come up and they wonder, well, you know, Mr. Montes, why can't you fix this? And you explained that I'm one of 5, you know, and this is an important.
I don't hire and fire anybody.
Exactly, yeah. And so there are important processes, and you follow those, and this has been referred to the superintendent, and let me know if you have any concerns with the follow-through, right? Excellent. So governance mindset, what are the board's governance goals? Every CSBA model has a board self-evaluation.
Before you move on.
Before we move on.
Yes. Thank you, thank you. We have a lot of community members that are involved in local politics and local, are in different types of boards, state and locally as well. And I usually hear this a lot. Well, I'm on this board and you're allowed to do that. I'm on that board and you're allowed to do that. I hear that a lot. Obviously, every board is different. Every jurisdiction operates differently. What would be the best response to that? Because normally what I would say is that exactly what I said. Every board is different. Every jurisdiction is different.
I think that's a really good response. That, for example, the legislature, a member of the California Assembly or the state Senate, they're very different rules about how they function than, as compared to how you function. They're just not the same. So helping them understand, how school boards operate, and sometimes you won't convince them, and they'll say, well, you could if you wanted to. Well, unfortunately, I can't, but I'm very interested in what you have to say, and I have forwarded this on to the superintendent, and, feel free to contact me if there are any continuing concerns. I mean, it's the best you can do in many situations, because you can't suddenly say, well, in your committee, you can do this, so I guess I'm going to take it on, and I'm going to do an investigation, and I'm going to discipline the employee, and, it's impossible what they're often asking you to do. So, but, politely explaining and being patient that they might not understand, they might not appreciate it, but,
They may not even be right.
Yeah, about the other body.
Half of the time they're not.
I mean, truly, they may be, they may know they're not following the law, and they've done it with impunity, and well, we do this, and it's really functional, so. And, you set your own standards as a board, and Mr. Keeler's right, you also are under different rules and regulations, so.
Yeah.
But to ask them why and what, and, people always want to talk. I had an experience at a board meeting once where we were going to have to lay off music teachers, and I had about had it. I was like 11 o'clock at night, and I didn't want to talk to a parent, and I finally said, you know what, you have 5 minutes. Tell me everything you want to tell me. After 2.5 minutes.
You didn't want to talk to him at first?
Yeah, I didn't. No, I didn't. It was a mistake on my part, quite honestly. I was already upset. It was, well, for one, I love music teachers. I didn't want to do it in the first place. And I said, you have 5 minutes. Just tell me what's on your mind. It didn't take him 5 minutes. And he walked away happy, and I walked away having learned an important lesson. So listening's important. You don't have to agree to listen.
Right. So your board bylaws include a board self-evaluation. I deal with a lot of boards, and a lot of boards never do the self-evaluation, have never done the self-evaluation. It's something I don't know if your practice has been to do it. It's in your board.
We've done it in the past.
Okay, well, good. Well, it is good because it's a good reminder. And so I have a few prompts here, but they're just things to think about, nothing that we're going to resolve right now. But what are the board's governance goals? What are your goals? You may set them every year. I think you have a mission statement, you have an LCAP, you have things that guide the entire district. Do you have goals guiding you in how you oversee all of these things? And if so, do you share these goals? Have they been revisited recently? It's something to think about. Unity of purpose, what does it look like in action? Do you have a shared moral imperative? So aligning district values with community priorities. That's usually, you think about the morality of what you're doing, or the ethical basis for why you're doing what you're doing. Consider that, and if you're on the same if you're on the same page with each other and appropriately reflecting the community's values as well. And again, how do we handle ideological differences, big picture differences? I mean, I was on a, not individual differences on action items, but are there bigger issues here? I have dealt with boards that had, the full spectrum of political affiliation, and from, some board members who were more libertarian and just questioned why they even thought public education was a necessity, right? All the way to...
And at the same time serving on the board?
Yeah. And talking about converting the entire district to a charter district. And, really, really interesting stuff, but very different than the ideological viewpoint of a couple other members who were more, kind of moderate liberal leaning, right? So you had a real difference of opinion of what this district should even be doing, right? I have never sensed, a giant ideological chasm in this district, but reaffirming your, why you're in this, and reaffirming how you're approaching what you do is a good thing through, again, the board self-evaluation.
We had we had a self-recognized neo-Nazi run for board one time. Saida remembers.
Saida remembers. Just, if anyone didn't catch that, it was not Saida. It was Saida remembers. Yeah, I mean, that would be quite the ideological split, right? Absolutely. So again, what are the governance culture? What are the views on engaging with diverse community perspectives, being open to shifting priorities based on external factors? I mean, we lived through that, of course, with COVID, but also with other mandates that we have, including with, how we have to approach education generally through the LCAP. A lot of people don't love that, right? But how do we approach that? Because we have to deal with it that way. And then how can we strengthen the board's role as a link between the community and the district? You are democracy. You are representatives of the community. And how do we strengthen that link? And again, to increase trust and, responsiveness to the to what the community expects. And then finally, governance infrastructure. We want stability, consistency, and focus. When we talk about infrastructure, those are practices and resources for you to get the information that you need. It's usually, the conduit is usually the superintendent or cabinet. And how is the infrastructure? How's it working? Are you aware of the goals? Are you getting the information back about your progress towards those goals? And how can you, ensure the stability of all the systems that you have? So what can we do to ensure that we have a unified board superintendent team? Well, I know on the agenda today in closed session is the evaluation. Not the final evaluation, and the courts have made it clear, and there was once upon a time uncertainty as to whether closed session under evaluation was only for a formal annual evaluation or evaluative type conversations. And the courts have said, no, you can go into closed session and talk about your relationship and how the communication is going, and touch base short of the annual evaluation. You can put that on the agenda periodically to touch base and say, here are our expectations, how are they being met, and let's talk about it. And that's an awkward conversation during open session, especially if there were a concern one way or another, but it's totally appropriate on the agenda, whether you're setting goals, whether you're doing preliminary discussion of the evaluation instrument, whether you are having a touch base, just seeing how things are going, or whether you're actually deep into the final evaluation. You have a lot of leeway to have conversations with your superintendent to make sure that you have a good relationship and that you have the communication and the information that you need. So that's it. That's our whole presentation. I wasn't going to try to resolve every, governance issue that you might have, but to have you thinking about a few things for future follow-up and consideration. So I appreciate your attention, and the fact that there were so many questions tells me that you're engaged and trying. So
I just wanted to know a little bit more about the board evaluation process. Like, what does that look like? Yeah, the self-evaluation, is that a survey? Is that a closed session item? How is that agendized? Is it a study session?
So that is a great question. You are not employees of the district, so your superintendent's evaluation happens in closed session. Your evaluation happens in open session, and in fact, your board bylaw states that. There is a commonly used instrument for a board self-evaluation. I think there's a model form that CSBA puts out, and that school districts will modify it to fit their own needs. But I think most districts that I'm familiar with either don't do it at all or they follow the CSBA model. I think it's a really healthy thing to do it from time to time. Your policy, I think, says annually, so it's best to do it annually or to modify your policy to do it biannually. But yeah, it's open session. There's usually an instrument that board members fill out separately, and then you compile it and have a conversation during a public meeting about where each member ranked the board. And it addresses things like communication with the superintendent, with interactions with each other, and during board meetings, and how effective they are and how civil they are, and there are just a lot of different rating scales, and it's usually like a 1 to 5 with a lot of different governance things. I should have brought a copy with me, but I did not. But it's worth looking into. I can email one.
We've also done self-evaluations for the board to just share amongst each other and just kind of have a conversation time to time in regards to and tie it into the superintendent's evaluation. Not necessarily base it off that, but around the same time. We've done it in the past. I don't remember ever doing it in an open session though. But
The results were in open session.
oh, okay.
Yeah, and very often you'll just on your own fill out the form, but then the results are discussed in open. And to the extent that you have board discussions about how you're functioning that relate directly to the performance of the superintendent, that is appropriate for closed session because it's evaluative of the superintendent.
That's
So
what we've done.
yeah, so your relationship with the superintendent and communications expectations and things like that, that's appropriate in closed session. But when you're talking about your interactions with each other, your conduct during open session board meetings and things like that, that's not evaluation of the superintendent. That doesn't happen in closed, and you discuss that. You do the tallying and you discuss that in open session.
I know from my 8 years, we've never had it. Each time it was brought up, it was more of a punitive. And I think as our district has been in transition, trying to even get a fair and balanced superintendent and a superintendent eval, I think we are at such a positive turning.
8 years in your
We've
medical
never
board?
had, no, I've been here on the board 2000.
Oh,
Sitting on the
6
board
years.
meeting.
Yeah.
So I think, in the present, now that we have stabilized the district and trying to get the evaluation that's fair and balanced for the superintendent and the goals, it's nice to have it. But I don't want anything to be unfairly on the board members who are electing right now. You know what I'm saying? I think we shouldn't do it in an election year out in pub to sway,
Yeah.
you know? But I think it's something that we can start evaluating what we want to do after.
Yeah. And it's not mandatory, it's not law, it's just a.
It's not required by law. That's a
Yeah.
good point.
We probably, it would probably be good sooner or later is to sit down with the superintendent and review our bylaws and update a lot of our bylaws, because a lot of our a lot of our,
Doing that.
well, yeah, but we also have a lot of, like that bylaw, for example, where our legal counsel is saying, hey, look at, even though you're not following it, maybe you want to change it or at least start abiding by it. That's an example of, a lot of bylaws that are just, were adopted in 1982, and, we should at least have a review, like a workshop to review, and just really have the board decide, hey, with the superintendent, hey, some of these bylaws need to be either updated or just,
Point of order, the topic. The topic.
Well, we did that about 3 years ago, I think.
We did a few.
Well, regarding
did a few.
regarding
Yeah,
board
we did a few.
evaluations.
A few,
That's right.
Not a lot.
That's right.
Like maybe
That's-
like 4 or 5.
And
maybe 6.
that's where the bylaw, yeah. And that's where the bylaw comes, but I think we've taken, those of us that have been on the board a lot, many years, we've taken the lax approach where if we don't evaluate, if we don't turn in an evaluation for the superintendent, it's assumed to be a good evaluation, and maybe me and Mr. Martinez over the years have taken that approach where, well, we don't need a board evaluation, most things are generally good.
Yeah, and things can be generally good, but things can always be better. And so whether you're formally going through a self-evaluation or finding some other way to raise issues about improvement. But I also agree with Dr. Lewis where, we're late in the season and we're very close to approaching an election, and I'm not suggesting that you do this before the election. Normally this is something that happens in June. Most boards that do it in June, right after the end of the student school year, or maybe in early July. But they may skip it in an election year just because it might be, something that can be, latched on by the community. And what we really want is it to be a tool of self-improvement, and not become something that's political.
But also a good evaluation, a good board self-evaluation is a good tool to show the community, look, the board themselves evaluate themselves, and it's, they believe in general, they're working well together, they're
Yeah.
collaborating,
Yeah.
some people mistaken controversial decisions for, a controversial board.
Agreed. Okay, well, that's the end of my presentation. Again, thank you so much for your participation. I didn't say that to get a round of applause, but I do appreciate it, and I appreciate Elliot
Good
being
evaluation.
here with me.
Thank
Oh,
you.
that was hoping for a discount.
And thank you.
I was hoping for a discount. Had to be Mr. Martinez.
All right, thank you, Mr. Keeler. Okay,
And thank you,
Thank you, Mr. Elliott.
Oh, it's a
Mr.
pleasure to be here.
Duchamp.
Good to see you
Duchamp.
all.
I'm sorry.
Shaw.
I had to write that one down. Okay,
I would say Duchon, but no, it's Duchamp.
I'll answer to anything. And I've been called much
Call me,
worse.
you call me to dinner if somebody's.
okay, we are on F to move into closed session. Motion and second,
So
please.
move. Second.
Okay, as provided by law, the following are the items for discussion and consideration at the closed session of the special board meeting. Public Employee Government Code, Section 54957, titled Superintendent, and evaluation evidently. So vote by board members to move into closed session.
Aye.
Aye.
And the time is 12:02.
Ricardo, I'm trying to go look at this.
Dr. Lewis already has her stuff put away there.
Jewel? Point of order.
Okay. Okay, we are on G, and welcome back. We are adjournment of closed session. Motion and second, please.
Second.
Thank you. Vote by all board members.
Aye.
Time? Time is 12:54. And everyone's favorite, adjournment of special board meeting. Okay, motion and second, please.
So moved?
Thank you. And vote by all board members.
Second.
Thank
Second.
you. We have a motion and a second. So all board members, how do you vote?
Aye.
All right, time is 12:55. Thank you, everyone.